Good morning, senior fives, long time members. I hope you are taking care of yourselves well. Remember to wash your hands, avoid public places, and stay safe while you are staying at home for this outbreak. So, class, I want to bring you back to our lesson, that is European history of 1789. But before we begin, please, I want us to go back. We want to look at Europe before the French Revolution. We say that Europe, on the eve of the French Revolution and before the outbreak of the French Revolution, the political, social, and economic conditions were almost the same, where European governments experienced similarities in culture and their system of governance. Monarchism was the most popular system of government, where kings ruled with excessive powers. Feudalism was the common practice, whereby a section of the ruling class controlled a lot of chunks of land at the expense of the poor and the peasantry. And in France, the Bourbon monarchy ruled France, while the Habsburg monarchy ruled Austria. The Junkers aristocracy ruled Prussia, while the Tsarist dynasty ruled Russia. Apart from Britain, remember, Britain was a democratic state. For them, they had already a constitution. They even had their system working. Most countries experienced similarities in the nature of administration, and that most of their governments were unpopular. So, if the conditions in Europe were almost the same, one wonders why a revolution broke out in France against the Bourbon monarchy and not in any other country in Europe. So we have looked at Europe before the eve of the French Revolution. Now we want to come to France. Why did the revolution begin in France and not in other parts of Europe? Class, this one now takes us to the French Revolution of 1789. We said that the French Revolution was a fundamental change that occurred in the French society, transforming it socially, politically, and economically. This was conducted by the discontented section of the French people, especially the Third Estate, against the Bourbon monarchy, which had ruled France for over 400 years. So the French Revolution was a fundamental change that took place. Something fundamental. It was an important change in social, political, economic lifestyles of the French people. Because they had been ruled badly for over 400 years. However, this revolution began peaceful with more demands. More demands. And when these demands were not made, it became violent in what was referred to as a reign of terror. So, when you talk about reign of terror, time came in France when the revolution began to kill its own children. The French people were killing themselves, and that's what they call Reign of Terror. This revolution broke out during the regime of King Louis XVI, who together with his wife Maria Antoinette had mismanaged France and its people. The revolution had both long-term and immediate causes, which can be analyzed below. So, that was the French Revolution. We are now going to look at the causes of the French Revolution. Remember, it occurred in France. It was conducted by the discontented group of the French people who were the peasants against the bad rule of King Louis XVI, together with the wife Maria Antoinette. This revolution became violent to what was referred to as the Reign of Terror, and had both long-term and short-term causes. The first cause, the unfair social class division on the French society. Sometimes they refer to it as the class struggle. The French society was divided into classes. For example, we had the privileged and the non-privileged. The privileged class included the clergy, those are the church leaders, the bishops, the pope, the cardinals, the catechists, all lie under the clergy, and the nobles. While the non-privileged included the middle class and the peasantry, who were urban dwellers. They were born in towns. Their livelihood were depending. They depended their livelihood on by staying in towns. And they had also gone to school, like they were professionals like teachers, doctors, lawyers, among other groups. They were all under the middle class. So, according to this, we are seeing the privileged class controlled large chunks of land and dominated the government posts in the government. Also, they were exempted from paying taxes and were promoted. Their children were promoted in the army to ranks like colonel, brigadier, major general, among others. While the bourgeoisie, the peasants, the middle class, these privileges were not given to them. Therefore, for them, they were instead subjected to compulsory military training. They were to pay taxes, and the means of collecting was very brutal and uncouth. They were sold on their lands and squatters. It was this that brought in a miserable picture, especially to the discontented section of the French people, the non-privileged, that made them to start a revolution, which came in 1789 in France, hence leading to the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. Class, remember to state your point in the first paragraph, that is the social class division. Bring out this division, for example, the privileged and the non-privileged class. Give the example. The privileged were the nobles and the clergy, while the non-privileged were the middle class, the peasants, and the bourgeoisie, who were town dwellers. We are seeing how the privileged enjoy. For example, they controlled big posts in the government. They possessed big chunks of land. They were exempted from paying taxes, while the non-privileged were subjected to compulsory military training, forced to pay taxes. They were sold on their land as squatters. So all of this is really unfair to the non-privileged. And it was this condition that made the peasants, the discontented class of the non-privileged, to start a revolution which came in 1789 in France. Another factor, the political unfairness of the ancient regime, was again another cause of the French Revolution. In France, during the regime of King Louis XVI, there existed what they call a dictatorship. The king was despotic in nature. For example, he had a lot of powers with no written constitution. The law rested on his hands. As he puts it, I am the state, and the state is myself. And something is illegal because I wish it. That was too much dictatorship that the king had imposed on the French people. The king carried people's lives on his hand through the letter de cachet, which meant imprisonment without trial. That made many innocent French masses to suffer in prison. It was this that annoyed the discontented section of the French society, especially the peasants, that made them to start a revolution, which came in 1789 in order to do away with the poor leadership of King Louis XVI, together with his wife, Maria Antoinette. Class, remember to state your point. And our point here is the political unfairness of the ancient regime. And you explain, we are saying that there existed dictatorship from the despotic king, Louis XVI, who had a lot of powers with no written constitution. And the law rested on his hands. For example, himself was the law. So whatever he would decide, no one would object. And it was this that someone stated that I am the state, and the state is myself. And something is illegal because I wish it. That showed that the king had a lot of powers. And he went on to arrest people. There he was still explaining. So this dictatorship is what annoyed the discontented group, that is the peasants and the middle class, to start a revolution which came in 1789 in where? In France. Class, we go to another factor that led to the outbreak of the French Revolution, and this was the financial crisis. So, during the regime of King Louis XVI, the finances went from bad to worst. This was because of unfair tax, imperial wars. It was this type of crisis that tempted the king to retrench the civil servants. And he thought by doing that, it would be a solution to the financial crisis. Also, it forced the king to summon to call for the Estate General meeting, which was to take place on 5th 89. Still, it was this financial crisis that made the government to borrow money from the French middle class. And by 1789, the government had not paid back. Also, this annoyed the peasants to join the revolution. The financial crisis also made the government fail to meet the needs of the French people, especially when a famine attacked France. And people expected the government to provide them with food. Unfortunately, the queen was arrogant. Instead of providing the hungry mob with food, he replied by that if you cannot afford the prices of bread, you rather go for cakes. This was an insult. What annoyed the French people to start a revolution. Also, it was the financial crisis that made the financial ministers Tagot and Necker to propose financial reforms of taxing nobles and the clergy as a way of raising revenue to the government. However, this annoyed the nobles and the clergy to propose the king to do away, to dismiss them, something that annoyed the French people to start the French Revolution. All those factors painted a miserable picture, especially to the discontented group of the French people, that made them to start a revolution, which came in 1789. So class, I would like you to use the same guidance that have guided you to try out other factors on the causes of the French Revolution. However, I encourage you, please, to stay safe at home. Please listen to your parents. Do some agriculture. Please avoid the public places. Avoid the marketplaces. Avoid visiting friends in the courts because they will cause you problems. So class, I want to encourage you, please, to read your books. We are here to help one another. We are waiting for your responses. So please, in case there is something that's not clear, we encourage you. You can call us on our lines. We are available. So class, as I end, I would also encourage you at this time, since it is raining, to plant some crops. You can plant some sukuma. You can help your parents to weed around because it is part and it is healthy to keep ourselves fresh and free from the outbreak of COVID-19. Please, I also encourage you to preserve nature. You can plant some trees along your compound so that you can live in a beautiful environment. So next time class, I bet that we shall begin on the personal weaknesses of the king. The personal weaknesses as another factor that led to the outbreak of the French Revolution. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I encourage you to be safe, to take care, and may God protect you. Thank you so much for listening. I remain Teacher Omodo Anthony. Hello.